My husband Marcus threw my suitcase onto the rain-soaked concrete driveway and slammed our mahogany door shut so hard it rattled the windows. Despite my crying, he hurled these cruel words at me. "You're nothing but a whore, Jasmine," he yelled from behind the door, his voice muffled yet venomous. "My father is finally dead, and I am the sole heir to a $90 million empire. I no longer need a healthcare worker playing the role of my wife. I need a woman who fits my new tax bracket. Get off my property before the police take you away." I stood there in the downpour, water streaming down my navy blue scrubs, watching the man I'd supported for 6 years destroy everything in 6 minutes. He thought he'd won. He thought the $90 million was his name on the deed. But Marcus forgot something crucial. He never read the fine print of his father's estate documents. And he definitely didn't know that the estate attorney was waiting for my phone call. Before I explain how I stripped everything from him without breaking a sweat, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Smash that like button and hit subscribe if you've ever had to humble an arrogant man who underestimated you. My name is Jasmine, and I'm 36 years old. I work as a nurse practitioner specializing in geriatric oncology care here in Charlotte, North Carolina. For the past 4 years, I was the only human being who genuinely cared for my father-in-law, Raymond, while he fought aggressive stage 4 pancreatic cancer. My husband Marcus was too preoccupied counting down the days until his father died so he could finally cash in on the family fortune. It was a cold Tuesday evening in late October when my entire world imploded. I was driving home to our estate in Myers Park after pulling a brutal 13-hour shift at the hospital. My feet were screaming inside my worn Nikes, and my head was pounding from dehydration and exhaustion. All I craved was a scalding hot shower and maybe 4 hours of sleep before I had to wake up and check on Pop. Ray, that's what I called Raymond. He'd been declining rapidly over the past few weeks, and I was the one managing his morphine schedule, his liquid nutrition plan, and his basic human dignity. Marcus couldn't handle the reality of illness, so he stayed locked in the guest wing of our house or disappeared for days, claiming he was networking with investors. As I turned onto the long curved driveway leading to the estate, my headlights sliced through the heavy Carolina rain. I squinted through my windshield, trying to process what I was seeing scattered across our perfectly maintained front lawn. There were shapes everywhere. Lumps of fabric, cardboard boxes, plastic garbage bags, all getting destroyed in the mud and downpour. I stopped my 12-year-old Honda Accord and stepped out into the freezing rain. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. It was all my belongings. My scrubs, my church dresses, my running shoes, my medical textbooks, everything thrown haphazardly across the yard like actual trash. My vintage Coach bag, the one Pop Ray had surprised me with for my birthday last spring, was lying split open in a puddle, its contents spilling out into the muddy grass. I ran toward the front entrance, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I punched our security code into the electronic lock, 2718. It beeped red twice. Access denied. I tried again, thinking my trembling, wet fingers had slipped on the touchpad. Access denied. I pounded on the heavy door with both fists. "Marcus, let me inside. What's happening? It's freezing out here." The lock clicked. The door swung open slowly. Warm yellow light poured out onto the covered porch, creating a sharp contrast with the bitter cold rain hitting my skin. Marcus stood in the doorway, and the sight of him made my blood turn to ice. He was wearing a burgundy silk bathrobe that cost more than 3 months of my car payments, holding a crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid that I recognized immediately. It was the 55-year-old single malt scotch that Pop Ray kept locked in his private study for genuinely special occasions. Marcus took a deliberately slow sip, swirling the expensive liquor around in the glass while staring down at me with pure contempt dripping from his expression. "You're back early," he said, his words slightly slurred. "I figured you had another double shift, wiping butts and changing bedpans for strangers." "Marcus, let me in," I said, taking a step forward onto the porch. "Why are all my things destroyed on the lawn? And why are you drinking Pop Ray's reserve scotch?" "You know he saves that for," Marcus laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound that echoed into the rainy night. "Pop Ray doesn't save anything anymore, Jasmine. Pop Ray is dead. He passed away 3 hours ago while you were out there playing Florence Nightingale for minimum wage patients." The world stopped rotating. The rain, the cold, the exhaustion, everything faded into a single crushing point of grief and shock. Pop Ray was gone. The man who'd treated me like his own. daughter when my parents passed away from COVID, the man who sat with me in the kitchen drinking chamomile tea and sharing stories about building his commercial real estate empire from absolutely nothing. He was gone, and I wasn't there beside him. I tried to push past Marcus to get inside, to run upstairs to Pop Ray's room, but he blocked the doorway with his arm extended across the frame. "Don't take another step," he sneered, his face twisting with disgust. "You have zero reason to be in this house anymore. The old man's gone, and his body's already been transported to the funeral home. And since he's dead, this entire house and everything inside it belongs to me now. Marcus, move," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I live here. This is my home too." "Not anymore," he replied, taking another casual sip of the scotch. "You lived here because Pop Ray had a soft spot for charity cases. He liked having free round-the-clock nursing care. But I'm the man of this house now. I'm the sole heir to the commercial properties, the investment portfolio, and the $90 million fortune. And frankly, Jasmine, you don't fit the aesthetic of a billionaire's lifestyle anymore. Look at yourself. You look like the help." He scanned me up and down with disgust, taking in my soaked scrubs and my messy hair plastered to my skull. I realized in that moment that he'd been planning this exact scenario. He'd been waiting for the precise second his father took his final breath to throw me away like garbage. "You can't just kick me out," I said, trying desperately to keep my voice steady and strong. "We're legally married, Marcus. This is our marital residence. You can't throw me out in the rain in the middle of the night like this. Watch me," he said flatly. "I changed all the security codes. I already notified the gate security team. You're officially trespassing on my private property." Suddenly, I heard a high-pitched giggle echo from inside the house. A woman appeared behind Marcus, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind and resting her chin on his broad shoulder. It was Crystal. I knew exactly who she was. Everyone in Charlotte knew who Crystal was. She was 23 years old, a social media influencer who'd been circling around the VIP sections of the clubs Marcus frequented for the past 6 months. But that wasn't what made me physically gasp and stumble backward. She was wearing my robe. My favorite silk robe with the hand-embroidered cherry blossoms. The one I'd bought for our 5th wedding anniversary last year. Desperately hoping to rekindle some intimacy in our completely dead marriage. "Babe, who is that at the door?" Crystal asked, looking at me with fake innocence, even though she knew exactly who I was. "Is that the nurse you told me about? The one who used to work here?" "Yeah," Marcus said, leaning back into her embrace. "Just the help. She's leaving right now." "You gave her my robe," I whispered, the humiliation burning hotter than the freezing rain. "You have your mistress in our house wearing my clothes on the same night your father died. Do you have no shame at all, Marcus? No respect?" "Shame is for broke people, Jasmine," Marcus spat back. "I'm wealthy now. I can do whatever I want, and what I want is for you to get off my property immediately." "I need my medication," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "My heart condition. You know, I need my beta blockers. They're sitting on the nightstand in our bedroom. Just let me grab my prescription bottle, and I'll leave quietly." Marcus laughed again, crueler this time. "Buy new pills. You have a job, don't you? Oh wait, I canceled your access to our joint bank account 2 hours ago. Better ask your boss for an advance on your next paycheck." He pulled his iPhone from his robe pocket. "Siri, call the main gate security. Tell them we have an intruder at the primary residence. Marcus, please." I begged, not for the marriage or for him, but for my actual life. "I'll go into cardiac arrest if I miss my evening dose. You know this. Pop Ray drove me to the emergency room last winter when I ran out. Please just hand me the bottle through the door." He looked at me with completely dead eyes. This was the man I'd shared a bed with for 6 years. The man I'd supported financially while he tried and failed to launch multiple startup businesses. "That sounds like a personal problem, Jasmine," he said coldly. He stepped back and slammed the door shut. The sound of the heavy deadbolt sliding into place echoed like a gunshot in my chest. I stood there on the porch, pounding on the solid wood door, screaming his name, screaming for my life-saving medication. But the massive house remained completely silent and dark. 3 minutes later, I saw the flashing blue and red lights of the private security patrol vehicle coming up the long driveway. These were men I knew personally, men I'd baked homemade cookies for every Christmas morning, men who waved at me cheerfully every day when I left for my early morning hospital shifts. Officer Davidson stepped out of the patrol car, He looked extremely uncomfortable, refusing to make eye contact with me. "Mrs. Patterson," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Mr. Patterson called dispatch. He says you're causing a disturbance. He wants you removed from the property immediately." "Davidson, you know me," I said, tears mixing with the cold rain on my face. "I live here. My critical medication is inside that house." He locked me out intentionally. "Please help me get my prescription pills." "I can't do that, ma'am," Davidson said, staring down at the wet ground. "He's the legal property owner now. He showed us the official deed transfer that his father signed 2 weeks before passing. If he wants you gone, you have to leave. If you don't leave voluntarily right now, I'm required to arrest you for criminal trespassing." I looked back at the house one final time. I could see Marcus and Crystal clearly through the master bedroom window on the second floor. They were toasting with champagne glasses, in the same room where I had nursed his dying father just 12 hours earlier. Marcus was celebrating his newfound wealth with a complete stranger while his wife stood freezing in the rain outside. I realized then that arguing was completely useless. Marcus had all the power right now. He had the house, the private security guards, and the illusion of legal authority. But he was drunk on power and blinded by greed. I walked slowly back to my car, my shoes squishing and sucking in the thick mud. I gathered whatever wet clothes I could salvage from the destroyed lawn and threw them into my back seat. As I sat in the driver's seat, shivering uncontrollably, my chest beginning to tighten from the stress and the missed medication dose, I looked up at that lit bedroom window one more time. "Enjoy it, Marcus," I whispered into the darkness. "Enjoy the champagne and the robe, and the feeling of victory. Because you have absolutely no idea what Pop Ray really thought of you. And you have no clue what he left specifically for me." I started the engine and drove away from the mansion, leaving behind the life I thought I'd built. I had no money, no home, no husband. But as I turned onto the main road, heading toward the only place I knew would take me in at 2:30 in the morning, a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't fear. It was absolute clarity. Marcus had just declared war. And he had no idea that he was fighting the only person who knew where all the bodies were buried. I drove straight to the 24-hour pharmacy first, praying desperately that my small personal savings account had enough for an emergency refill. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel properly. I wasn't just grieving Pop Ray's death. I was grieving the 6 years I'd wasted on a man who saw me as completely disposable. But grief would have to wait until later. Tonight was purely about survival. Tomorrow would be about revenge. I woke up to the harsh glare of a security flashlight beam piercing through the fogged-up windows of my sedan. For a confused second, I forgot where I was. I reached out instinctively for Marcus, expecting the luxurious warmth of our Egyptian cotton sheets. But my hand hit the cold, hard plastic of the steering wheel instead. The reality crashed down on me like a physical weight, crushing my chest. I was 36 years old. I had a master's degree in nursing. I was a respected nurse practitioner with excellent patient reviews. And I was sleeping in the back seat of my car, in the employee parking lot of the very hospital where I saved lives every single day. My neck was stiff and painful. My stomach growled with a hunger that felt more like nausea. I sat up slowly, shivering, pulling my thin coat tighter around my shoulders. The first thing I did was reach for my phone with numb fingers. Maybe Marcus had sobered up overnight. Maybe he'd realized he'd gone way too far. But there were 0 missed calls from him. Just a single notification from our bank. I opened the mobile banking app with trembling hands. "Access denied, account frozen. Please contact the primary account holder for assistance." He'd actually done it. He'd cut me off completely and permanently. I checked my own small personal savings account that I'd kept separate. $87. That was literally all I had to my name. Because every other cent of my biweekly paycheck had gone directly into our joint account to pay the mortgage and Marcus's excessive credit card bills while he played entrepreneur. Panic started rising in my throat, choking me. I needed a hotel room. I needed food. I needed a proper shower before my shift started in exactly 4 hours. I scrolled desperately through my phone contacts. My parents had both passed away 3 years ago. I had no siblings or extended family nearby. The only family I'd known for the past decade was Marcus's family. I paused on the name Veronica. She was Marcus's sister-in-law, married to his younger brother Trent. She was a wealthy white woman from the old money section of Myers Park who'd always looked at me like I was a permanent stain on her expensive designer furniture. But she was a mother of two young children. Surely she would understand that you don't abandon family members on the street in an emergency. I pressed the call button. It rang 5 times before she answered, her voice groggy and extremely irritated. Hello? Who's calling at this ungodly hour? Veronica, it's Jasmine, I whispered, trying desperately to keep my voice from shaking apart. I'm so sorry to wake you up like this. Marcus locked me out of the house last night. He literally threw me out in the pouring rain. I'm sleeping in my car right now. I just need a place to take a shower and maybe sleep for a couple hours safely. Please? There was a long, uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the rustle of expensive bedsheets, then a cold, sharp laugh that made my blood run cold. Oh, Jasmine, Veronica said, her voice absolutely dripping with condescension. I was actually wondering when you'd finally call begging. Marcus already told the entire family everything last night. Told you what? I asked, genuinely confused. That he got drunk and kicked his grieving wife out in the freezing rain. He told us that you threatened him physically, Veronica said, her voice sharp as broken glass. He said you went completely psychotic when you discovered that Raymond left everything to him legally. Look, I always suspected you were only with Marcus for the lifestyle upgrade. Anyway, you should have known your place a long time ago, honey. You're a nurse, Jasmine. You were never truly one of us. You were just hired help that Marcus made the mistake of marrying during a weak moment. Veronica, please, I pleaded, hot tears stinging my eyes. I have nowhere safe to go right now. That sounds like a personal problem to me, she replied coldly. Don't call this number again or I'll report you to the police for harassment. You gold-digging trash. The line went dead with a harsh click. I stared at my phone screen, the display blurring completely through my tears. Gold digger. The irony was so bitter it physically hurt. If only they knew the truth. If only they knew who'd actually paid all the bills for years. If only they knew who'd cleaned up Marcus's messes while they were out living their perfect, privileged lives. I leaned my head back against the cold seat and closed my burning eyes, letting the complete exhaustion pull me under into unconsciousness. The smell of the car's stale coffee and old fast food wrappers faded away slowly, replaced by the sharp smell of hospital-grade antiseptic and lavender hand lotion. My exhausted mind drifted backward to 4 years ago. The day Pop Ray received his devastating cancer diagnosis. The day Marcus stopped being a son and started being a vulture circling overhead. I was in the master suite of the estate, but not the bedroom Marcus and I shared. I was in Raymond's private room. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn tightly shut, blocking out the bright Carolina sunshine. The room had that distinct metallic scent of advanced cancer that no amount of expensive air freshener could ever mask completely. Raymond was struggling to sit up, his thin, frail arms shaking violently as he reached desperately for his water glass on the nightstand. I was beside him instantly, sliding my arm gently behind his back, supporting his weight. He'd lost 60 pounds in 4 months. The powerful businessman who'd built a commercial real estate empire from absolutely nothing was now lighter than a small child. I've got you. Pop Ray, I whispered softly, carefully adjusting his pillows. Take it easy now. He took a small sip of water, coughing harshly as the liquid went down his damaged throat. He looked at me with eyes that were sunken deep, but still remarkably sharp and alert. Where is he, Jasmine? Where's my son? I hesitated, hating myself for lying to him, but the cruel truth was too painful to speak out loud. Marcus was supposed to have been here 4 hours ago to help me lift Raymond safely for his sponge bath, but Marcus wasn't here. He wasn't answering his phone. He's stuck in traffic, Pop Ray, I lied, smoothing the blanket gently over his thin legs. Big investor meeting downtown today. He feels absolutely terrible about missing this. Raymond let out a weak, wheezing laugh that turned into a cough. Traffic on a Sunday morning? You're a terrible liar, Jasmine, but you're a genuinely good woman. I turned away quickly to wet the washcloth in warm water, hiding my face from him. I started the slow, careful, dignified process of cleaning him. I gently wiped his face, his arms, his chest. I changed his adult diaper with as much grace and respect as I could possibly muster. This was the reality of $90 million. It wasn't champagne and yacht parties. It was bed sores and vomit and the slow, painful fading of a human life. And I did it alone, every single day, without complaint. My phone buzzed loudly in my scrubs pocket. I pulled it out, thinking maybe Marcus was finally close to arriving. It was a text message from him. A photo loaded slowly over the weak signal. He was at a casino table in Las Vegas, holding a massive stack of colorful poker chips, a lit cigar clamped between his white teeth. A cocktail waitress in a revealing outfit was leaning over his shoulder, smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Vegas baby, winning big for the family empire." He wasn't in an investor meeting. He wasn't stuck in traffic anywhere. He was in Las Vegas, gambling away his monthly allowance from his father, while that same father lay dying in his own waste at home. I felt a weak hand grip my wrist tightly. Raymond was staring at the phone screen in my hand. He'd seen the photo. He'd seen everything. "He's not coming today, is he?" Raymond asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, Pop Ray," I admitted, my shoulders sagging under the weight of the truth. "He's not coming." Raymond closed his eyes slowly, a single tear tracking through the deep lines carved into his weathered face. "I failed him, Jasmine. I gave him too much money and asked for too little character in return. I raised a man who genuinely thinks the world owes him everything, and he owes the world absolutely nothing. It's not your fault, Pop Ray," I said firmly, squeezing his hand. "Marcus makes his own choices every single day." Raymond opened his eyes and looked at me with an intensity that actually frightened me. "Listen to me very carefully, Jasmine. You've been more of a real child to me than the ones who actually share my blood and DNA. You cleaned me when I couldn't clean myself. You fed me when I couldn't lift a spoon. You listened to me ramble when I was too weak to form complete sentences. They only see the bank account balances and investment portfolios. You actually see the human being." He gripped my hand even harder, his strength surprising me. "Don't let them break you into pieces. When I'm gone from this world, they will finally show their true faces to everyone. They will try to crush you under their feet. But you're smarter than all of them combined. You're stronger than they could ever be. Promise me you won't let them walk all over you like a doormat." "I promise, Pop Ray," I said, thinking he was just talking from medication-induced delirium. He smiled then. It was a secret, knowing smile that I didn't fully understand at the time. "Good," he said, "because I've made absolutely sure they can't touch what's rightfully yours." I snapped back to the present moment. The sound of a car horn blaring in the hospital parking lot jolted me fully awake. The sun was rising slowly, casting a gray morning light over the medical complex. My entire body ached from sleeping cramped in the car, but the memory of that conversation burned bright and hot in my chest. Pop Ray knew. He knew exactly who Marcus really was deep inside, and he knew exactly who I was. I checked my phone again. It was 7:15 in the morning. There was a new email notification waiting. Sender, Marcus Patterson. Subject, dissolution of marriage. Immediate action. Requeretti opened it with shaking hands, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just a casual email. It was a legal document attachment. A formal divorce petition filed electronically at 8 o'clock this morning. I scrolled through the dense legal language, my eyes widening at the sheer cruelty of every single word. Petitioner Marcus Patterson requests sole possession of the marital residence. Petitioner claims all assets are separate property acquired through inheritance. Respondent Jasmine Patterson to receive zero spousal support or alimony. He wasn't just divorcing me. He was systematically erasing me from existence. He wanted to throw me away like a used tissue now that he thought he'd secured the fortune. Then a text message notification popped up at the top of my screen. It was from Marcus. A photo loaded slowly over the weak hospital Wi-Fi connection. It was Marcus sitting behind the wheel of a lime green Lamborghini Huracan, the custom interior stitching perfectly matching his arrogant grin. He was at a luxury exotic car dealership. The text message read, "Happy Wednesday, Nurse Jasmine. Just dropped the down payment on my new toy since I'm feeling generous today. Here's my final offer. Sign those divorce papers by noon today and agree to walk away with absolutely nothing. And I'll cash up you $5,000. That's enough for a security deposit on a studio apartment in the hood where you actually belong. Don't even think about fighting me on this, Jasmine. You don't have money for a lawyer, and I have 90 million reasons why I'll win in court." I stared at the photo of him, looking so smug and confident. The man who'd missed every single one of his father's chemotherapy appointments because he was too hungover to drive. The man who was buying a $250,000 supercar 12 hours after his father took his last breath on earth. Something deep inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic snap. It was quiet and cold. It was the sound of the last remaining thread of love and loyalty I'd had for my husband finally severing completely. The grief I'd been drowning in, that heavy, suffocating sadness, evaporated instantly. In its place, a cold, hard rock of pure hatred formed in the pit of my stomach. $5,000. He thought that was my price. He thought he could purchase my dignity for less than the cost of one of his custom suit jackets. I looked at his smiling face in that photo one more time. He looked so confident, so secure in his victory, so incredibly stupid. He had absolutely no idea. He truly had no clue whatsoever. I didn't reply to his message. I didn't cry. I wiped my face clean with a baby wipe from my glove compartment, fixed my hair in the rearview mirror as best I could, and put on a fresh pair of scrubs from my emergency work bag. I had a 12-hour shift to work. I had patients who genuinely needed my care and expertise. But as I walked toward the hospital entrance, my phone buzzed one final time. It wasn't Marcus this time. It was an unfamiliar phone number with a 700 for area code. I answered cautiously, my voice completely flat and emotionless. "This is Jasmine, Mrs. Patterson. This is Richard Montgomery, your father-in-law's estate attorney. I've been trying to reach you since early this morning." I stopped dead in the middle of the crosswalk, causing someone behind me to bump into my shoulder. "Mr. Montgomery," I said carefully. "Marcus told me you were handling the asset transfer directly to him, Mr. Montgomery let out a dry, humorless chuckle that sent chills down my spine. "Marcus says many things, Mrs. Patterson. Most of them are factually incorrect. I tried reaching him this morning, but he appears to be busy shopping for luxury vehicles he can't actually afford yet. He told my paralegal to just mail him the inheritance check and skip the formal reading." I stood up straighter, my heart beginning to pound. "What do you need from me, Mr. Montgomery?" "I need you in my office tomorrow morning at exactly 9 o'clock sharp," the lawyer said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Marcus needs to be there too, obviously. But frankly, Mrs. Patterson, you're the person I really need to see face to face." Raymond left very specific instructions in a sealed letter. "And Mrs. Patterson, yes? Don't sign anything Marcus sends you. Not a divorce paper, not a settlement agreement, absolutely nothing. You're about to become a very, very busy woman." He hung up abruptly. I looked up at the gray morning sky, and for the first time in 24 hours, I smiled. It wasn't a nice, warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who just realized she'd been holding a loaded gun this entire time. Marcus wanted a war. He wanted to treat me like worthless trash. Well, he was about to discover that the trash he threw away was holding the keys to his entire kingdom. I walked into the hospital with my head held high. Let him enjoy his Lamborghini test drive for one more day. Tomorrow morning, I was going to take the keys, the house, the fortune, and that arrogant smile right off his face. The funeral of Raymond Patterson wasn't a memorial service. It was a theatrical production. A carefully orchestrated spectacle designed to announce to Charlotte's elite that the king was dead and a new prince had seized the throne. I parked my beat-up Honda 4 blocks away in a public parking garage because I knew Marcus would have private security, screening every vehicle at the main entrance. I walked the rest of the distance, my heels clicking on the wet pavement, my only black dress clinging to my body in the thick Carolina humidity. It was the only morning dress I owned that still fit properly. I'd lost 18 pounds over the past 6 weeks caring for Pop Ray, running myself into exhaustion while Marcus spent his nights club hopping with investors who didn't actually exist. The fabric was faded badly at the elbows, and the hem was starting to unravel. But it was clean. It was respectful. It was all I had. As I approached the massive cathedral, camera flashes blinded me temporarily. Local news vans lined the entire street. Pop Ray was an absolute legend in this city, a self-made man who'd built a commercial real estate empire starting from a single run-down strip mall. Everyone in Charlotte wanted to pay their respects, or at least be photographed appearing to care. I tried slipping quietly through the side entrance, desperately hoping to find a corner pew where I could grieve privately. My heart felt like concrete in my chest, heavy and suffocating. I just wanted to say a proper goodbye to the man who'd been more of a father to me than my own biological parent, but a massive hand suddenly blocked my path forward. I looked up into the mirrored sunglasses of a private security contractor. He was built like an NFL linebacker, and his expression showed zero friendliness. "Name?" he grunted, holding an iPad with a digital guest list. Jasmine Patterson, I said quietly, my voice barely steady. I'm the daughter-in-law. Raymond was my father-in-law. The guard scrolled through the list with his thick finger, frowning deeply. Then he tapped his wireless earpiece. I've got a Jasmine here claiming to be family. Copy that. He looked back at me, his face completely impassive. Sorry, ma'am. Mr. Patterson gave us extremely strict instructions. The immediate family list is locked and finalized. You're not on it. I felt all the blood drain from my face completely. Not on the list? I was his wife legally. I was the person who'd held Raymond's frail hand when he took his final labored breath. Check again, please, I begged desperately. I'm Marcus's wife. I lived with Raymond for years. The guard shook his head firmly. Mr. Marcus Patterson is arriving now with the official grieving party. He listed his relationship status as single on the security protocol sheet. You need to step back behind the public barricade with everyone else. Before I could argue further, a sleek black stretch limousine pulled smoothly up to the red carpet at the curb. The massive crowd of reporters surged forward aggressively, shouting questions over each other. The rear passenger door opened slowly and Marcus stepped out into the sunlight. He looked absolutely magnificent. I hated him desperately for it. He was wearing a custom-tailored Tom Ford charcoal suit that fit his athletic frame perfectly, designer sunglasses hiding his eyes from view. He looked exactly like what he'd always wanted to be, the grieving billionaire heir stepping into power. He turned gracefully and extended his hand back into the limousine, helping someone else emerge. It was Crystal. She was wearing a tasteful black Dior dress that probably cost more than my entire annual nursing salary. She clung dramatically to Marcus's strong arm. Dabbing at completely dry eyes with an expensive lace handkerchief, they paused deliberately for the wall of cameras. Marcus bowing his head in calculated sorrow, Crystal leaning into him for visible support. They looked like the perfect tragic power couple straight from a glossy magazine cover. The sheer audacity of it stole my breath away. He was parading his 23-year-old mistress in front of Charlotte's entire elite society at his father's funeral, while his legal wife stood behind a velvet rope with complete strangers. Marcus looked up. Then, and even through his dark sunglasses, I felt his cold gaze land directly on me. He said something quietly to Crystal, then whispered instructions to the head security guard. The guard nodded once and lifted the velvet rope barrier just barely enough for me to squeeze through awkwardly. Marcus immediately grabbed my upper arm hard. His fingers dug painfully into my flesh through the thin, worn fabric of my dress. He didn't look at me directly. He kept his face forward, maintaining his sad smile for the clicking cameras, while he hissed venomously into my ear. What the hell are you doing here, Jasmine? I thought I made it crystal clear you weren't welcome at this event. I came to say goodbye to Pop Ray, I whispered back, trying unsuccessfully to pull my arm free from his grip. Let me go, Marcus. You're hurting me. You look like a homeless person, he sneered, his voice low and dripping with contempt. Look at that pathetic dress. You're a complete embarrassment to the brand image I'm building. This is a high-profile event. I'm your wife, Marcus, I said through gritted teeth. These people know me. They know who I am. Nobody actually knows you, he countered coldly, dragging me roughly toward the side entrance, away from the VIP red carpet. Nobody genuinely cares about the nurse who changed the adult diapers. Today is about legacy and power. It's about the future of this empire, and you're definitely not part of that future. He shoved me hard through the heavy oak side door into the cool vestibule of the massive church. The air inside smelled of expensive lilies and designer perfume. Listen very carefully, Marcus said, backing me aggressively against a cold marble pillar. You can stay for the service, but you sit in the absolute back row, the very last pew. If I see you anywhere near the front section, if I catch you trying to talk to the press or network with board members, I will have security physically drag you out so fast your head will spin. Do not let anyone here know who you are or what your relationship to this family was. Today is the day I officially introduce myself to Charlotte's elite as the new empire builder. I absolutely cannot have a broke, washed-up woman dragging down my market value and social credibility. He straightened his expensive silk tie, smoothed his perfect suit jacket, and walked away confidently. Leaving me trembling alone in the shadows, he rejoined Crystal, who was waiting patiently by the main sanctuary doors, and together they walked down the center aisle with heads held high. graciously accepting condolences from city council members and corporate CEOs. I waited until the formal procession had completely started before I quietly slipped into the sanctuary. I found a seat in the very last pew, tucked strategically behind a thick stone support column. I was invisible, just another anonymous face among hundreds of attendees. The memorial service was beautifully produced, but emotionally hollow. People who'd barely known Raymond personally went up to the podium and delivered polished speeches about his business brilliance, his wealth accumulation, his market influence. Not a single person mentioned his infectious laugh. Nobody talked about how he loved strawberry cheesecake, or how he hummed old Motown songs when the cancer pain got unbearable. Marcus sat prominently in the front row, dead center. He wiped away manufactured tears when the gospel choir sang Amazing Grace. He played the grieving son role perfectly. Seated beside him were his younger brother Trent and Trent's wife Veronica. Veronica was wearing an oversized black hat with a dramatic veil that blocked the view of anyone unfortunate enough to sit behind her. She looked profoundly bored, checking her expensive watch every few minutes. Midway through the service, during a particularly long pastoral prayer, I saw Veronica stand abruptly. She whispered something to Marcus and made her way deliberately up the side aisle, presumably heading to the restrooms in the back vestibule. As she passed my row, she stopped walking. I tried desperately to shrink deeper into the wooden pew, praying silently she would just keep moving. But Veronica never missed an opportunity to kick someone when they were already down. She turned and squeezed into my row, even though there was plenty of open space to simply walk past. She was holding a silver monogram flask in her manicured hand. The kind wealthy people sneak into events when they can't wait for the official reception to start drinking. Oh, my God, she whispered, loud enough for the entire row in front of us to hear clearly. I genuinely didn't think you'd actually have the nerve to show your face here. Please, Veronica, I whispered desperately, staring straight ahead at the altar. Not now, not here. This is a funeral. You just don't get it, do you? She hissed, leaning closer. You're like a cockroach, Jasmine. We try to exterminate you and flush you out, and you just keep crawling back into our lives. Look at yourself. You look like you got dressed in a dumpster. She pretended to stumble then. It was an obviously clumsy, theatrical movement. Anyone could see was intentional. Her hand jerked dramatically and the open flask in her grip tilted forward sharply. Dark red wine splashed across the entire front of my dress. It soaked instantly into the faded black fabric, spreading across my chest and lap like a fresh bleeding wound. The sharp smell of cheap alcohol immediately filled the small space around us. Oops, Veronica said, with exaggerated fake concern dripping from every word. Oh, dear. I'm just so terribly clumsy today. She pulled a crumpled tissue from her designer purse and dabbed aggressively at my chest, pushing the dark stain deeper into the fabric fibers. Look at that mess, she said, with a cruel smirk. Now you look like a drunk stumbling into a funeral. Probably for the best, honestly. It matches your desperate, pathetic vibe perfectly. She dropped the wine-soaked tissue directly into my lap with disgust. You should probably leave immediately, she whispered coldly. You smell absolutely terrible now. Marcus would be mortified if he caught even a whiff of this disaster on you. Oh, wait, he's already mortified by your entire existence. She straightened her expensive hat carefully, smoothed her designer dress over her hips, and walked away. Her heels clacked loudly on the polished stone floor. I sat there completely frozen. The cold wine seeped through my dress to my skin. I could feel the judgmental eyes of the people around me burning into my body. They were physically wrinkling their noses in disgust, whispering harsh comments to each other. Who is that woman in the back? Is she actually drunk at a funeral? How incredibly disrespectful. Someone should ask her to leave. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to stand up and shout that Veronica had deliberately done this on purpose, that I was the widow, that I was the only person in this entire cathedral who had actually loved the man lying in that expensive casket, but I did nothing. I sat perfectly still, my hands clenched so hard in my lap that my knuckles turned bone white. I let the wine soak completely in. I let the cruel judgment wash over me in waves, because Raymond had made me promise something on his deathbed. He'd gripped my hand with surprising strength and told me to be patient. He told me they would eventually reveal their true colors to everyone. And when they finally did, I needed to be ready to strike. So I sat in that wet, sticky, wine-stained dress, and I watched everything carefully. I watched Marcus deliver a beautifully written eulogy about a father he'd barely spoken to in years. I watched him talk passionately about carrying on the sacred legacy of integrity and honor, and I memorized everything. Every single lie, every fake tear, every calculated moment of cruelty. They thought they were burying me along with Raymond today. They thought if they humiliated me enough times, I would finally disappear forever. But they forgot something crucial. You cannot shame or break a woman who has absolutely nothing left to lose. As the pipe organ music swelled powerfully for the recessional, and Marcus walked past me with his chin held high, not even glancing once in my direction. I made a silent vow to myself. This was their perfectly choreographed show. But the final curtain call would belong entirely to me. The sound of a champagne cork popping echoed through the grand foyer of the estate like a gunshot. I stood near the entrance, still wearing my wine-stained black dress, watching in horror as my husband's funeral reception transformed into an obscene celebration party. The traditional repast, meant for quiet reflection and sharing cherished memories of the deceased, had been completely hijacked. Marcus had replaced Pop Ray's gospel playlist with heavy club beats that rattled the antique crystal in the cabinets. Waiters circulated smoothly with trays of expensive caviar and oysters that Pop Ray would have absolutely hated. There was no fried chicken, no collard greens, no cornbread. Marcus had systematically erased his father's soul from this house before the body was even cold in the ground. I watched from the shadows as Marcus climbed dramatically onto a velvet dining chair in the center of the living room. He held a bottle of Ace of Spades champagne in one hand and a wireless microphone in the other. His face was flushed bright red with alcohol and the dangerous adrenaline of new money. "Listen up, everyone," Marcus shouted, his voice booming over the pounding bass. "Today we say goodbye to the old way of doing things forever. My father built a decent little business with those commercial properties. I'll give him credit for that. But let's be completely honest here, who wants to rent office space to accountants in 2024? A ripple of sycophantic laughter spread through his entourage of fake friends. "We're leveling up dramatically," Marcus continued, gesturing wildly with the champagne bottle. "I'm talking total demolition and renovation. We're converting those boring office buildings into Club Raymond. VIP bottle service sections, celebrity DJs, Instagram model waitresses. We're bringing Miami's energy to Charlotte, baby." The crowd erupted in cheers. These weren't Pop Ray's friends or business associates. These were parasites and leeches, people who'd never stepped foot in this house when Raymond was alive, but now swarmed desperately around the honeypot of inherited wealth. I felt physically nauseous. He was going to destroy everything. The legacy, the history, the community impact that Pop Ray had cherished more than his own life. I desperately scanned the room, searching for a friendly face. I needed to find Mr. Montgomery. The estate attorney had to be here somewhere witnessing this absolute madness. I spotted him near the marble fireplace, looking grim and uncomfortable, holding a glass of plain water like a defensive shield. He was watching Marcus with eyes that burned with barely concealed disapproval. I took a step toward him, but I never made it across the room. A wall of bodies suddenly blocked my path completely. It was Marcus's inner circle, 3 men in expensive, but poorly fitted designer suits, who'd spent the last 6 years borrowing money from Marcus that everyone knew he'd never see returned. They formed a tight semicircle around me, cutting off my route to the lawyer. Well, look who crawled out of the woodwork. One of them sneered with disgust. "It's Nurse Ratched herself." They all laughed cruelly, clinking their champagne flutes together. "Man, look at her dress," another one said, pointing rudely at the dark wine stain. "She looks like she got into a fight with a bottle of Merlot and lost badly. You sure you belong in here, sweetie?" The third one asked with mock concern. "The service entrance for staff is around the back of the house." "Excuse me," I said firmly, trying to push past their wall of bodies. "I need to speak with Mr. Montgomery immediately." One of the men stepped directly in front of me, blocking my way. He was tall, with a diamond stud earring that caught the light. "Mr. Patterson gave us very clear instructions," he said, his voice dropping to a threatening register. "No disturbances allowed. And you, honey, you look like a major disturbance. Why are you even still here, Jasmine?" Another one laughed. "The ride is officially over. The ATM is permanently closed. Marcus doesn't need a sponge anymore. I'm his legal wife," I said, my voice trembling with barely controlled rage. "For now." The man with the earring laughed cruelly. But we all see the significant upgrade over there. He gestured toward the front of the room where Crystal was holding court, laughing loudly, her hand resting possessively on Marcus's bicep. She looked radiant and expensive, a stark visual contrast to my disheveled, stained appearance. You should have signed those divorce papers when you had the chance, the man continued, leaning uncomfortably into my personal space. Now you're just embarrassing yourself publicly. Look at you standing here. You're wearing literal rags in a room full of wealth. Do yourself a massive favor and disappear before security physically drags you out. I looked desperately past them, trying to catch Mr. Montgomery's attention. But the lawyer had turned away, cornered by another aggressive group of guests asking questions about the estate. I was trapped, isolated in my own former home, surrounded by people who saw me as nothing more than an annoying obstacle to be removed. Suddenly, the deafening club music cut out completely. A harsh feedback screech from the microphone silenced every conversation in the room. Marcus was now standing on the raised stone hearth of the fireplace, commanding the absolute attention of every single person in the packed room. He looked powerful and unhinged. He looked manic. I have one more major announcement to make, he bellowed, his eyes scanning the crowd with wild excitement. Today is a day of endings, absolutely, but it's also a day of incredible new beginnings. He reached down and pulled Crystal up onto the hearth beside him. She giggled like a teenager, feigning shyness as she smoothed her expensive dress over her curves. For way too long, I felt trapped, Marcus said, his voice taking on a rehearsed theatrical quality. Trapped in the past, trapped by obligations to people who didn't appreciate my vision or understand my potential. But now I'm finally free, and a king needs a queen who truly understands his worth and matches his ambition. He dropped dramatically to one knee on the stone hearth. The entire room gasped collectively. I stopped breathing completely. He was not about to do this. Not here. Not at his father's funeral reception. Crystal, baby, Marcus said loudly, producing a black velvet ring box from his jacket pocket. You've been riding with me since day one. You've supported my vision. Will you marry me and help me build this empire into something legendary? Crystal screamed a high-pitched sound of pure delight and nodded enthusiastically. Yes. Oh my God. Yes, baby. Yes. Marcus stood up smoothly and slid a massive diamond ring onto her finger. It was huge, gaudy, and undoubtedly purchased with credit he absolutely couldn't afford to pay back. The room erupted in thunderous applause. People were cheering wildly, whistling, raising their glasses in celebration. I stood frozen against the back wall, my heart shattering into a million jagged pieces. It wasn't that I wanted him back. I genuinely loathed him now. But the sheer disrespect was absolutely suffocating. He was proposing to his 23-year-old mistress over his father's grave, while his legal wife stood 20 feet away in a wine-stained dress. Then Marcus saw me. His eyes locked directly onto mine over the sea of cheering heads. The smile on his face shifted into something darker, something cruel and predatory. He tapped the microphone deliberately. Hold on, everybody, he said, silencing the celebration. We have an uninvited guest here tonight. The crowd turned as one. Hundreds of eyes followed his pointed finger until they all landed on me. I stood alone near the entrance, the circle of his friends having parted strategically to leave me completely exposed under their collective judgment. I held my head high, absolutely refusing to shrink away or run, but my insides were trembling violently. Well, Marcus said, his voice dripping with theatrical pity. If it isn't the grieving widow herself, Jasmine, I specifically told you to leave. You're seriously bringing down the entire vibe here. I didn't speak. I just stared directly at him, letting my silence serve as my testimony. Look at her, folks, Marcus continued, gesturing at me with his champagne bottle like I was an exhibit. This is exactly what bitterness looks like in human form. She's furious because the gravy train finally derailed. She's mad because she thought she could trap me forever with guilt and obligation. But you can't trap a lion, Jasmine. He laughed, and the room laughed with him, a sea of desperate sycophants clawing to stay close to his money. You know what? Marcus said, stepping down from the hearth and walking directly toward me. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, creating a clear path. He stopped exactly 3 feet away from me, Crystal trailing behind him with a cruel smirk plastered on her face. I feel exceptionally generous today, he said loudly. I really do. I just got engaged to the love of my life. I'm worth $90 million. I should help the less fortunate, right? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip. He peeled off several bills, 20s, a few 10s, what looked like maybe $200 total. He crumpled the bills in his fist and then tossed them at my feet like I was a beggar. The money hit the expensive hardwood floor with a soft, humiliating sound. There, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone in the back to hear clearly. Uber money. Take a ride back to whatever cheap motel you're staying in. Get out of my house, Jasmine. You're trespassing on my future. The room fell into deadly silence. All eyes were on the crumpled cash on the floor, then on me. This was it. The final, complete break. He had stripped me of my home, my dignity, my marriage, and my status. He expected me to cry. He expected me to scream or physically attack him so he could have me arrested in front of everyone. Instead, I slowly bent down. My knees popped audibly in the heavy silence. I reached out with a steady hand and picked up the crumpled bills carefully. I smoothed them out one by one with deliberate precision, stacking them neatly. I stood up straight and looked Marcus dead in the eye. I didn't look at Crystal. I didn't acknowledge the crowd. I looked only at him. Thank you, Marcus, I said, my voice clear, calm, and carrying through the silent room. I'll put this toward my legal fees. Marcus's confident smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Confusion flickered briefly in his bloodshot eyes, but before he could respond or process what I'd said, I turned my back on him completely. I walked through the silent crowd with my head held high. I didn't run. I didn't look down at the floor. I walked past Veronica, who was watching with her mouth hanging open in shock. I walked past the security guards, who shifted uncomfortably. I walked out the front door, down the stone steps, and into the cool October night air. I still had the $200 clutched in my hand. It wasn't money to me anymore. It was a receipt. It was physical proof of his cruelty that I would never forget. And as I walked toward my car, passing the row of luxury vehicles that belonged to his fake friends, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. He thought he had just purchased my disappearance. But he had actually just bought his own complete destruction. I checked my watch. It was 8:45 at night. I had exactly 12 hours until my meeting with Richard Montgomery. 12 hours to prepare mentally. 12 hours until the axe finally fell. I didn't go to a motel. I drove directly to the one place where I could think with absolute clarity. The one place Marcus would never think to look for me. The 24-hour Waffle House on Independence Boulevard, where Pop Ray used to take me for late-night hash browns and coffee when the chemo kept him awake and restless. I ordered black coffee and sat in our usual corner booth. And I waited, because I knew Mr. Montgomery would find me here. He knew Pop Ray's habits and routines better than anyone alive, and sure enough, exactly 23 minutes later, the headlights of a vintage black Mercedes swept across the parking lot, cutting through the darkness. The real meeting was about to begin. The fluorescent lights of the Waffle House hummed with a low electric buzz that perfectly matched the vibration running through my exhausted nerves. It was 1:30 in the morning. The diner was mostly empty, just a long-haul truck driver nursing coffee in the corner and a couple of college kids sobering up over scattered hash browns. I sat in the corner booth we'd always claimed, the vinyl sticking slightly to the back of my legs. My dress was still stained with Veronica's red wine, a mark of shame that I now wore like battle armor. On the table in front of me sat a mug of black coffee that had gone cold over an hour ago. I stared out the rain-streaked window into the dark parking lot, watching headlights occasionally pass on the highway. I was homeless. I was a widow. I was the laughingstock of Charlotte's high society, thanks to my husband's performance at the reception. But strangely, I didn't feel afraid anymore. I felt like a coiled steel spring waiting to snap. A pair of bright headlights swept across the booth, temporarily blinding me. A pristine vintage Mercedes pulled into the spot directly in front of the window. It was immaculate black paint gleaming even in the dim parking lot lights. I knew that car intimately. I had hand-washed and polished the chrome on it for Pop Ray. When his arthritis got too severe to do it himself, Richard Montgomery stepped out. He was a distinguished man, with deep mahogany skin and a posture that made his 72 years look like 55. He was wearing an expensive trench coat over a perfectly pressed three-piece suit. Even at this ungodly hour, the man looked like he'd stepped out of a board meeting. He opened the diner door and the bell chimed. He didn't look around or hesitate. He walked straight to my booth and slid into the seat directly opposite me. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was holding up. He looked up at the waitress approaching with a steaming pot of coffee. "I'll take the number 6, he said, his voice gravelly and authoritative. "Pecan waffle, extra crispy, bacon burnt to a crisp, coffee with 4 sugars." The waitress scribbled it down and walked away. I felt hot tears prick my eyes unexpectedly. That was Pop Ray's exact order. Every Sunday after church, before he got too sick to leave the house, he would bring me to this exact Waffle House and order precisely that. "You remembered?" I whispered, my voice breaking. Richard looked at me, his eyes soft behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Raymond was my best friend for 43 years, Jasmine. I remember absolutely everything. And I remember that he told me you were the only person in the entire world who never once asked him for a single dollar." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He placed it carefully on the table between us, but kept his hand firmly on top of it. "Marcus thinks he won the lottery today," Richard said quietly. "I heard about the grotesque spectacle at the house. The proposal, the cash thrown on the floor. It was disgusting, but it was entirely predictable. He thinks he has the inheritance," I said flatly. "He told everyone at the funeral that the estate is his." Richard chuckled, a dry sound with absolutely no humor in it. "Marcus thinks many things. He thinks because he carries the Patterson name, he automatically carries the Patterson character. But Raymond knew much better than that. Raymond knew his son was rotten fruit from a good tree." The waitress returned with the coffee and the pecan waffle. Richard waited patiently until she left before he leaned in closer, his entire demeanor shifting from old family friend to ruthless attorney. "Raymond didn't trust bloodlines, Jasmine," he said, his voice dropping low. "He trusted character. About 7 months ago, when Marcus started disappearing for 3 and 4 days at a time, claiming he was closing major investment deals in Miami, Raymond got suspicious. He had me install hidden cameras throughout the house." My breath caught hard in my throat. "Cameras? Where exactly?" "Everywhere," Richard said simply. "In the study, in the hallways, in the kitchen, and most importantly, in his bedroom, the sick room where he spent his final months." I felt a flush of embarrassment and heat. Oh God, he saw me changing him. He saw everything. He saw a daughter loving a dying man with dignity and grace. Richard interrupted firmly. "He saw you crushing his pain pills so he could swallow them without choking. He saw you reading scripture to him at 3 in the morning when the pain was too unbearable for sleep. He saw you singing those old hymns to calm him down during panic attacks." Richard took a deliberate sip of his sugary coffee, his eyes never leaving mine. "And he saw Marcus too. We have crystal clear footage from 4 weeks ago, Jasmine. The night Marcus came home drunk, after you'd gone to the pharmacy for medication refills. Raymond was asleep in his bed. Marcus didn't check his father's pulse. He didn't adjust the blanket or check his oxygen. He walked directly over to the antique dresser and took the vintage Rolex that Raymond received when he opened his first commercial property. He slid it into his pocket and walked out of the room without looking back." I covered my mouth with my hand, feeling physically sick. "He stole from his dying father. He pawned it the very next day," Richard said coldly. "We have the receipt from the pawn shop. Raymond watched that security footage the following morning. He cried, Jasmine. He actually wept because he realized his son wasn't just lazy and entitled, he was a common thief. That was the exact day he called me to his bedside to rewrite everything." Richard tapped the manila envelope under his hand. "Marcus is walking into my office tomorrow morning expecting a coronation ceremony. He thinks we're going to read the last will and testament of Raymond Patterson, dated 6 years ago. That will did leave everything to him, the entire empire. But," I started. "But Marcus is fundamentally lazy," Richard continued. "He never bothered to check if there were any updates or amendments. And he certainly doesn't understand the critical legal difference between a will and an irrevocable trust." He slid the envelope across the sticky table toward me. "Open it." My hands trembled violently as I undid the metal clasp. I pulled out a heavy stack of legal documents bound in blue paper. The title at the top read, "The Raymond Patterson Irrevocable Living Trust." I looked up at Richard, completely confused. "What does this mean?" "It means," Richard said, slicing methodically into his waffle, "that 6 years ago, right after Marcus got his 4th DUI arrest, Raymond moved every single asset he owned out of his personal name. The commercial properties, the residential real estate portfolio, the investment accounts, the mansion you were just thrown out of, even the vehicles. He transferred legal ownership of everything into this trust. He pointed his fork at the document. When Raymond died 2 days ago, his personal estate was worth almost nothing. Maybe $6,000 in a checking account and some old clothing. That's what Marcus is going to inherit tomorrow morning. The contents of a closet and pocket change. But the trust? I asked, my mind racing to comprehend. Who controls the trust? Richard smiled, and for the first time, it was a genuine, predatory grin. Turn to page 7. I flipped through the pages frantically. My eyes scanned the dense legal language until I found the section labeled Beneficiaries and Trustees. Primary beneficiary, Jasmine Marie Patterson. Sole trustee, Jasmine Marie Patterson. Protect, Jasmine Marie. Pattersoni stared at my name typed in bold letters. It didn't seem real. None of this seemed possible. Sole trustee means you're the boss, Richard explained patiently. You don't just inherit the money, Jasmine. You control the entire empire. You decide who gets paid. You decide who lives in the properties. You decide who manages the commercial buildings. You have absolute power over every asset Raymond built over 40 years. He sat back, wiping his mouth with a paper napkin. And because it's structured as a trust, it's not subject to probate court. Marcus cannot contest it in court. He cannot freeze the assets. It's already yours legally. It became yours the exact second Raymond's heart stopped beating. He paused for effect. While Marcus was throwing your clothes onto the lawn in the rain, you technically already owned the grass he was standing on. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up dangerously in my chest, a sound I quickly swallowed. I own the house? You own the house, Richard confirmed. You own the deed. You own the mortgage note. You own the security codes. You own everything. And the divorce? I asked, suddenly remembering the brutal email Marcus had sent. He wants me to sign away my rights to his inheritance. Richard laughed out loud this time, a genuine sound of amusement. Let him file whatever paperwork he wants. In fact, sign the papers if you feel like it. Since the inheritance is held in a trust, specifically in your name, it's separate property. It's not marital property subject to division. Even if you stay married, he cannot legally touch it. But if you divorce him, he leaves with exactly what he has in his own name, which I happen to know is a mountain of credit card debt and a leased Lamborghini he absolutely cannot afford. I looked down at the document again, my hands shaking. $90 million. The power to completely crush the man who had tormented me. The power to evict Veronica, the sister-in-law who had poured wine on me at the funeral. Why didn't he tell me? I whispered. Why did he let me worry about money for medications? He wanted to protect you, Richard said softly, his voice gentle now. He knew, if Marcus found out before he died, Marcus would have made your life absolute hell. He might have even tried to hurt Raymond to accelerate the inheritance. Raymond wanted you to be safe. He wanted the transfer to be instant and completely irreversible. Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. They were heavy, old-fashioned iron keys attached to a leather fob. These are the master keys to the estate, Richard said. And this, he handed me a sleek black American Express card, is the corporate credit card for the trust. It has a spending limit of $6 million. He leaned forward, his eyes intense and focused. Go buy yourself a new wardrobe, Jasmine. Get your hair done at the best salon in Charlotte. Walk into my office tomorrow morning looking like the CEO of a $90 million empire. Don't walk in there like a victim. Walk in there like the boss you are. I took the keys. The metal was cold and heavy in my palm, substantial. I thought about Marcus laughing as he threw money at my feet. I thought about Veronica sneering at my stained dress. I'm not going to just buy a dress, I said, my voice steady and ice cold. I'm going to buy the entire damn department store. Richard grinned widely. That's the Jasmine that Raymond loved and trusted. That's the woman he wanted running his empire. He stood up and buttoned his coat. 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow, Jasmine. Don't be late. And bring that $200 Marcus threw at you. I have a feeling we're going to need it for the court filing fees. He walked out of the diner, leaving me alone in the booth with a stack of papers worth more than the entire neighborhood's combined net worth. I picked up a piece of the burnt bacon from the plate he'd left untouched. It was salty and crispy, exactly the way Pop Ray had loved it. I took a bite. It tasted like absolute victory. The next morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. in a luxury suite at the Ritz-Carlton. I'd used the black corporate card to book it. The bed was like sleeping on a cloud. The shower had heated marble floors. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, looking at my transformation. I was wearing a charcoal gray Armani power suit that cost $7,000. My hair was blown out perfectly sleek. My makeup was flawless, natural but powerful. I was wearing the diamond studs that Pop Ray had left for me in his personal safe deposit box. I looked like money. I looked like power. I looked like the woman who was about to end Marcus Patterson's entire world. I checked my phone. There was a text message from Marcus sent at 7:30 this morning. Don't forget. Sign the papers by noon, or I'm coming after you for everything. You have nothing. I have everything. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I smiled at my reflection. Oh, Marcus. You have absolutely no idea what's about to happen. I picked up my new Hermes briefcase, grabbed the master keys, and walked out of the suite. It was time to go claim my empire. The conference room at Montgomery and Associates was waiting, and Marcus was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his entitled life. The morning sun was bright and sharp as I pulled up to the law office in my new car, a midnight blue Tesla Model S that I'd purchased with the corporate card at 8 a.m. that morning. Cash deal, no financing. I could see through the glass walls of the conference room that Marcus had already arrived. He'd brought his entire circus with him. He was wearing another white linen suit that looked absurd in late October, paired with expensive loafers and no socks. He was sprawled in the chair at the head of the conference table like he owned the building. Crystal was there, hanging off his arm, wearing a tight red dress, completely inappropriate for a legal proceeding. She was taking selfies in the window reflection. Trent and Veronica had come too. Veronica was already rearranging chairs so she could sit closer to Marcus, probably to whisper renovation plans in his ear. They were laughing. They were celebrating. They looked like vultures who'd already started the feast. They had no idea they were sitting in a trap. I checked my reflection one final time in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the exhausted nurse in stained scrubs. She was not the grieving widow humiliated at a funeral. She was the boss. I grabbed my briefcase, took a deep breath, and walked toward the building entrance. It was time to end this. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and walked into the conference room. My heels clicked on the marble floor with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown to Judgment Day. 4 heads turned simultaneously. For a split second, there was complete silence. They didn't recognize me. They saw a woman in a $7,000 suit carrying a Hermes briefcase and radiating absolute authority. Then Marcus squinted, his feet dropping from the conference table with a loud thud. "Jasmine?" he asked, his voice cracking with disbelief. I walked to the chair at the opposite end of the table, directly facing Marcus. I pulled it out slowly and sat down, placing my briefcase on the polished wood with a deliberate sound. "What the hell are you doing here?" Marcus demanded, his shock quickly morphing into his usual sneer. "Did you get lost on your way to beg for your job back?" Veronica let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Oh, my God, look at her playing dress up. Did you max out a credit card at a consignment shop, Jasmine? You better hope you kept the receipt." I ignored her completely. I opened my leather folio and took out a gold pen. I uncapped it and set it next to my notepad with precision. Marcus stood up, his face flushing red. "I asked you a direct question. Security at the gate said you were permanently banned. How did you get in here?" "I'm here for the reading of the will," I said, my voice calm and ice cold. "The will?" Marcus laughed harshly. "You're not in the will, Jasmine. Pop Ray knew better. He knew you were just a gold digger waiting for a payday. Why do you think he left everything to me?" "Maybe she came to beg for her toaster back," Crystal chimed in, snapping her gum. "Did we throw out her toaster, babe?" Veronica leaned forward, her eyes narrowing like a predator. "Or maybe she's here to grovel for a job. We're going to need a housekeeper, Marcus. Someone to scrub toilets. I mean, she's already used to cleaning up shit, right?" They all laughed, a pack of hyenas cackling over prey they thought was already dead. Richard Montgomery entered through a side door, carrying a single thin folder. He sat down at the middle of the table and looked directly at me, giving an almost imperceptible nod. "Good morning, everyone," Richard said gravely. "About damn time," Marcus snapped. "Kick her out, Richard. She's trespassing. This is private family business. Mrs. Patterson is here at my specific invitation," Richard said firmly. "She is a necessary party to these proceedings." Marcus rolled his eyes. "Fine, let her stay. Let her watch me become a billionaire. Maybe she'll learn what real success looks like." Richard put on his reading glasses and looked over the rims at Marcus. Are we ready to proceed? Just read the paper, Marcus said, waving dismissively. Skip the legal jargon. Just tell me the total. Is it 90 million? Or did the portfolio increase? Richard cleared his throat. I will now read the last will and testament of Raymond James Patterson, dated 6 years ago. 6 years ago. Marcus interrupted. That's perfect. Before he got sick and soft, Richard continued, ignoring him. I, Raymond James Patterson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. Article 1. I leave my vintage car collection to be divided equally between my sons Marcus and Trent. Marcus nodded eagerly. Okay, cool. I can liquidate those. Keep going. Article 2. I leave my personal wardrobe to be donated to Goodwill, with the exception of my fishing gear, which goes to my brother-in-law. Marcus frowned impatiently. Whatever. Get to the money, the accounts, the properties. Richard turned to the final page. Article 3. Regarding my liquid assets and financial holdings, I hereby leave the sum of $2,000 to my son, Marcus Patterson. The room went silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Marcus blinked rapidly. 2,000? You mean to million, right? Like point to million. Richard shook his head slowly. No, $2,000. 1000. Marcus stood so fast his chair tipped over backward, crashing to the floor. What kind of sick joke is this? 2,000 doesn't even cover the champagne I bought yesterday. Where's the rest? Where are the buildings? Where's the 90 million? Richard looked down at the document. And I leave the sum of $2,000 to my son, Trent Patterson. Trent slammed his fist on the table. This is bullshit. We know how much he was worth. Forbes had him at 92 million. You're stealing it, Richard. Richard looked up, his face completely impassive. This concludes the reading of the last will and testament of Raymond James Patterson. The estate consists solely of his checking account, which contained $4,000, and his personal effects. Marcus lunged across the table, ripping the document from Richard's hands. He scanned it frantically, his eyes darting back and forth like a madman. This is impossible. He screamed. He owned 30 commercial properties. He owned this estate. He owned the vacation condo. Nothing is listed here. Why is nothing here? Veronica stood up, pointing at Richard with a shaking finger. You tricked him. You made him sign a fake will. We'll sue you. We'll destroy your career. Richard removed his glasses slowly and folded them. I didn't say there was no money, Mrs. Patterson. I said there was no money in his estate. What does that even mean? Marcus roared, throwing the will on the floor. Money is money. Richard turned his head deliberately and looked directly at me. It's not in the estate, Marcus, because 5 years ago, right after you were arrested for your 4th DUI, and right after Trent dropped out of his MBA program for the 2nd time, your father made a decision. He decided he didn't want his life's work squandered on bottle service and bad investments. So what did he do? Marcus asked, his voice trembling with dawning horror. He transferred every single asset, Richard said with finality. The commercial properties, the residential buildings, the investment portfolios, the intellectual property, the brand rights. He moved everything out of his personal name. Moved it where? Marcus whispered. Into an irrevocable trust, Richard said. The Raymond Patterson Legacy Trust. And who controls it? Marcus choked out. Richard smiled coldly. Why don't you ask the trustee? She's sitting right across from you. Marcus turned his head slowly. He looked at me. He looked at my suit. He looked at the calm expression on my face. No, he whispered. No, not her. She's just a nurse. I stood up slowly. I picked up my briefcase. I looked Marcus directly in the eye, and for the first time in 6 years, I didn't see a husband. I saw a scared little boy who'd just broken his favorite toy. Hello, Marcus, I said softly. Did you bother reading the property deed before you kicked me out? Or were you too busy drinking pop? Ray's scotch? Richard pulled out a remote control and aimed it at the large screen on the wall. Raymond wanted you to hear this directly from him. The screen flickered to life. It was a video recorded in this very office 8 months ago. Pop Ray was sitting in a chair, looking frail, but with blazing, intelligent eyes. Marcus, if you're watching this, I'm gone, Pop Ray said, his voice raspy but strong. And knowing you, you're probably in an expensive suit you can't afford, yelling at Mr. Montgomery about your inheritance. Marcus physically flinched as if slapped. I gave you every chance, son. I bailed you out of jail. I paid your gambling debts. I bought you businesses that you destroyed because you were too lazy to show up sober. I hoped you'd grow up. But you didn't. You just got greedier. Pop Ray coughed and continued. I saw you steal my Rolex while I was sleeping. I saw you abandon Jasmine to care for me while you partied. You broke my heart. So I'm leaving everything to the only person who loved me for me. Jasmine, she's the daughter I wished I had. She owns it all now, Marcus. If you want a dime, you'll have to ask her. And frankly, I hope she gives you nothing. The screen went black. Marcus was shaking, tears of rage streaming down his face. You poisoned him against me. You manipulated a dying man. He lunged at me. It happened fast. Marcus scrambled over the table, hands reaching for my throat. But two massive security guards stepped out from the shadows. They caught him midair and slammed him face first onto the conference table. Get off me. Marcus wheezed. I'm Marcus Patterson. You don't own anything, the guard said, twisting his arm. I walked around until I was standing in front of Marcus's face pressed against the wood. You wanted to throw me out, I whispered. You wanted me homeless and begging. I straightened up and turned to Veronica. And you poured wine on my dress at the funeral. You told me I was just the help. Veronica swallowed hard. Jasmine, we were stressed. It was a joke. Here's what's not a joke, I said, picking up a property deed. That guest house you're living in? It's owned by the trust. I'm your landlord, Veronica, and I'm evicting you. 24 hours. If your stuff isn't out, the sheriff will set it on the curb. Where will we go? Veronica wailed. That's a personal problem, I said. Using Marcus's own words, I looked at my watch. Oh, and Marcus? Remember that divorce petition you filed yesterday? Marcus looked up with one desperate eye. Section 4, paragraph B, I read aloud from my briefcase. Petitioner Marcus Patterson asserts that all assets, including future inheritances and trust distributions, are separate property not subject to division. Petitioner waives all rights to spousal support. I dropped the paper next to his face. You were so afraid I'd take your imaginary $90 million that you legally waived your right to my actual $90 million. Thank you for that. Richard stood. Guards, remove Mr. Patterson. If he returns, call the police. They hauled Marcus to his feet. His white suit was wrinkled and his nose was bleeding. Jasmine, wait, he pleaded as they dragged him toward the door. Crystal, baby, tell her. Crystal was already at the window, taking off her engagement ring. This looks messy and you're broke, Marcus. I don't do broke. She walked out without looking back. Marcus's screams faded as the elevator doors closed. I parked my Tesla in the visitor lot of the county jail. My lawyer had advised against coming, but I needed to see the end of this story with my own eyes. When they brought Marcus out, I barely recognized him. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by a faded orange jumpsuit. His head was shaved. He'd lost 30 pounds. He looked broken. He picked up the phone. I picked up mine. Jasmine, he said, his voice cracking. Thank God. Please get me out. It was a mistake. I was grieving. I'm not here to bail you out, I said calmly. I'm here to say goodbye. Jasmine, please. I'm your husband. We were happy once. It's not about the money, Marcus. It's about principle. You called me worthless. You said I didn't fit your aesthetic. Well, look at us now. It's my father's money. He hissed. You stole it. Your father gave it to the person who loved him, I corrected. He gave it to the person who stayed. You left. You stole. You lost. I stood up. The company's thriving, by the way. Profits are up 20%. We opened 3 new properties. Pop Ray would be proud. I hung up the phone. Marcus was screaming, pounding on the glass, but I couldn't hear him. I walked out into the bright Carolina sunshine. I drove to the cemetery. It was a beautiful afternoon. The sky was brilliant blue with white clouds. I walked up the hill to the family plot. It was peaceful. The city noise was just a distant hum. I knelt in front of the marble headstone. Raymond James Patterson, beloved father and mentor. I placed white orchids on the grass, his favorite. I did it. Pop Ray, I whispered. I cleaned house just like you asked. I sat there for a long time, thinking about the journey. The pain, the betrayal, the fear. It had all forged me into something stronger. I didn't keep all the money for myself. I expanded the business ethically. I created jobs. I started a scholarship fund for nurses pursuing advanced degrees. I called it the Jasmine and Raymond Patterson Grant. I stood up and brushed grass from my knees. I had a board meeting at 2. I had decisions to make. I had an empire to run. I walked back to my car, head held high. I was Jasmine Patterson. I was 36 years old. I was a black woman who'd started with nothing and ended with everything, and I'd done it without losing my soul. I started the engine and drove away, leaving the past where it belonged. The road ahead was open, and for the first time in years, I was the one behind the wheel. The most important lesson to be learned from Jasmine's story is that character is the only value that truly matters. Marcus and his family believed that their lineage and rights gave them power, but they were morally bankrupt. This is one of the most important values that hold a family together. Jasmine's quiet strength, honesty, and genuine interest in Pop Ray were the investments that yielded the highest returns. True power is not about shouting the loudest or flaunting newly acquired wealth. It is about silence, preparation, and being aware of your own worth, even when the world tries to push you aside. If you believe honesty is always more important than privileges, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories where justice is applied with cool-headedness.